Everyone. It's Thursday, August 24th, 5:03, and we are talking about GOP politics. I thought we'd just hop on because there's a lot happening in Republican politics right now. Last night, I don't know if anybody watched the Republican debate on Fox News. Love to hear what you all thought. And they all tried to make a case for life after Donald J. Trump, but who didn't show up, but as you know, did a pre-taped interview with Tucker Carlson. I haven't had a chance to watch it. I don't know if you've watched the Tucker Carlson interview with Donald Trump. But anyway, he is going to show up tonight at the Fulton County Courthouse, where he faces 13 counts from conspiracy to violating the state's Racketeering Act. You may have seen the Rudy Giuliani mugshot, which was a far cry from the Time magazine cover story he did as America's mayor back on September 11th, when he performed so admirably and kept the world together. So we're going to talk to Charlie Sykes about the debate, and we're also going to talk to him about what we can expect will happen tonight in Fulton County in Georgia. And Charlie's the co-founder and editor-at-large of The Bulwark. He's the host of the Bulwark podcast, author of the Morning Shots newsletter, and an NBC, MSNBC contributor. Hey, Charlie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry I'm late.
Don't worry. No problem at all. I'm actually my daughter, I think, is joining us. Hi, Carrie Monahan, if you're watching. Charlie, thanks a lot just wanted to hop on and kind of do a quick review of last night's debate in Milwaukee, kind of the winners, the losers, who you thought did well, who you didn't think did well, and what should we expect in Georgia tonight in prime time, mind you, when Donald Trump is, book 'em, Dano, for conspiracy, 13 counts from conspiracy to violating the state's Racketeering Act, using RICO as sort of a broad conspiracy to, change the election. But first, let's talk about the debate, Charlie. What did you think? Who did you think did a good job, and what surprised you?
Well, a couple of things surprised me. I mean, I think that, the more I think about it, I think that there were three big winners, and they're relatively, obvious. And, people need to withhold the comment on this because, obviously, Vivek was the breakout MAGA star. Now, I personally think that he's a shameless demagogue, which makes him more dangerous because he's somewhat talented. He speaks fluent MAGA, and he was hitting all the right buttons. He was hitting all the buttons of Trump world, and so that was kind of his moment. The other person that surprised me the most was
let me guess.
Yeah.
Let me guess.
Okay.
Nikki Haley.
Yes. I have to say, she was not even on my radar screen. I'm not a big fan, but she turned in an amazingly strong performance, a really strong performance. And she clearly, I mean, I actually had been wondering whether she was running for vice president or president. And last night, she made it very, very clear that she's not interested in being Donald Trump's vice president. I thought she was very, very effective in going after Vivek, in basically, pointing out how shallow his isolationist policies were, his global surrender tour to the thugs of the world. So I thought that Vivek, if you think of it as two different lanes, the MAGA lane and the non-MAGA lane, Vivek clearly won the MAGA lane. She, I think, won the more normie lane, and I think she's going to get a second look from the donor class. And I am sorry to say that the other winner of the night, and we can leave this aside, was Donald Trump, who was able to sit back, not show up, and still watch the degree to which this party was prepared to bow the knee to him.
I thought it was interesting that former Donald Trump advisor David Urban said on CNN right afterwards, he said, "I think tonight proves that you don't need Donald Trump to be in a debate to have a shit show." I mean, it really did seem unruly. Do you blame the moderators for that? Was it just everybody was so kind of amped up to get their moment in the sun, to have their soundbite, to do something to set them apart from the pack?
Well, there's a lot of blame to go around. If anybody thought that this was sort of the, Fox's way of restoring its respectability after the whole Dominion lawsuit, not really. I don't think that they had really good control. I don't think the questions, with some exceptions, were terribly well focused. And then of course it's the nature of things like that, where you have a live audience of partisans, and you have 8 people on the stage.
I thought
and so
the audience was incredibly distracting and obnoxious.
They were, and they weren't really able to control, how they behaved. So yeah, that was made it kind of a shit show. But there were moments where you saw some real differences. You asked me about some surprises. I was surprised at how well Mike Pence did. Probably shouldn't have been. He's not going to be the nominee. I continue to deeply respect Asa Hutchinson, although he has no shot whatsoever. And I was very surprised frankly, I shouldn't have been surprised, how really weak Ron DeSantis was. I mean, it's sort of gotten old at this point, Katie, to point out that he's really bad at this. But, he started out shouty and never looked comfortable in his skin. And this was not the debate that he needed or wanted. He didn't have a breakout moment. He seemed to shrink and become kind of an afterthought. So everybody today is talking about Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley and of course, Donald Trump. But nobody.
What about, I'm sorry to interrupt, Charlie. I was going to ask you about Chris Christie. You wondered if, other than trashing Trump, if he had something to say. I don't know. I thought he did a pretty good job. What about you?
Well, I'm a fan of Chris Christie. I admit that. One of the reasons why I tuned in to watch this was to see Chris Christie's political performance art, and he brought the heat. But in this kind of a format, it's difficult. And also, he didn't have the foil of Donald Trump. And then, of course, the Fox moderators asked him the single dumbest question of the night about UFOs, which he couldn't believe. So I thought he was effective. And I do admire someone who stands up before a crowd like that and says something that he knows will lead to him being booed, and he says it anyway. The guy is fearless. So I'm glad that he's up there, because, it's one thing for you and I to talk about Donald Trump's character or write about it in the Bulwark or go on MSNBC or Morning Joe. But the importance of last night was this was inside the room. This is on Fox News. That is a crowd of Republican voters, and whatever bubble they live in, at least last night, they heard Chris Christie saying, we cannot normalize this. Whatever you think about the criminal charges, the conduct is disqualifying. And it's important that somebody says that. Whether it will make a difference, I don't know. I don't think that the debate changes the overall dynamic of this primary that Donald Trump is leading by, 40 points.
You mentioned Mike Pence, and I thought he handled his role and said he put the Constitution above, what he was being asked to do. But gosh, he was really so, and sorry, I don't mean to be, to be anti-religion or anything like that, but it was so leaning into his Christianity and Jesus and God, and obviously evangelical voters will really like what they heard. Does that have the potential to really turn people off, though, who are more moderate Republicans?
Well, yes, and swing voters, but that's Mike Pence's base. And so, what you saw was each of the candidates throwing out, the lines and the memes and the narratives that are going to, get that faction of the Republican Party turned out. So if Mike Pence has any shot, which he doesn't, in Iowa, it will be if evangelical voters rally around him. Now, there's no evidence that that's going to happen, but that's really the heart of his constituency. So not that surprising. I mean, Mike Pence, it did strike me as I was watching him, that Mike Pence looks like what Republicans from the before times looked for in a presidential candidate. He kind of looked presidential, with the exception of the constant religious invocation. But he does seem a little bit like he thinks it's still the mid-1990s, or it's before 2015. So the contrast between what Republicans used to think they wanted in a president, Mike Pence, versus, the new hotness, Ramaswamy, is really an indication of where this party has gone in the last few years. That this sort of glib, substance-free demagogue like Ramaswamy, who keeps throwing out these ridiculous ideas, is now the heartthrob, the rock star, whereas the former vice president of the United States, governor of Indiana, is really cold product.
I thought it was interesting too how Nikki Haley separated herself from the pack by criticizing Republicans for their spending and basically saying they need an accountant in the White House. I thought that was a really interesting strategy because it was basically saying, all these people have been making mistakes. It was a way for her to differentiate herself from Trump and sort of his allies and from some of the people on Capitol Hill as well. Were you surprised at that? And also her comment on abortion, on a federal ban on abortion, saying, guys, let's be honest with the American people. We don't have the votes in the Senate.
No, I mean, on issue after issue, this is why I was surprised by how strong her performance was on spending, on abortion, and on Ukraine. She was really serious, sober, and substantive. But that first answer to the kind of the softball question about spending, when she went after other Republicans, that's when I kind of sat up and said, okay, this is not going to be the Nikki Haley that I thought there was going to be, because this is speaking truth to the party and taking it on. And when she specifically called out Donald Trump for raising the national debt by $8 trillion, I mean, that was, okay, that signaled where she was going. And on the abortion issue, she, said, and again, the temptation at these debates is to take the most extreme radical position, to say it's simple and we can just do this or that. And she says, no, look, we don't have the votes. We're going to have to compromise. We're going to have a consensus. And she didn't get booed off the stage for that. I mean, it led to an interesting debate. They're all pro-life. They're all anti-abortion. But the division between those who wanted the national ban and the state ban was interesting. And she was the one who said, look, let's have a reality check here. Anything you want, if you want a national piece of legislation, it's got to go through the House, and you need 60 votes in the Senate, and this is something that most Republican candidates and talking heads don't want to level with their voters about, which is like, this is not going to happen. If we tell you what's going to happen, we're misleading you. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought her
policy
was I thought that was her. Of course, it would be her strong suit,
right?
But that was I think a really interesting moment where she took it to Ramaswamy, called him out, and if I'm reading the room correctly, and I'm here in Milwaukee, but I wasn't in the room, that crowd was with him. He was dominating the night until that moment. And then I think you could feel the mood shift. And that was a pretty good moment for her. Doesn't mean she's going to win, but it was a good moment.
I thought it was pretty shocking, though, what he said about climate change. After the summer we've had, he felt particularly tone deaf to completely dismiss global warming at a time where, most people, I think, are acknowledging, I mean, there may be different solutions, but his full embrace of the fossil fuel industry and his dismissal of any kind of climate change argument it just seems that seemed a little 90s to me.
Well, but that is very much what he is doing here. He's pandering. He's throwing out these lines that he knows will give the MAGA base, their dopamine hit. But it was interesting in the context because they had a young person asking the question. Clearly, the questioner was concerned about global warming, was concerned about climate change. And rather than seriously address that question, he said, it's a total hoax. We're not doing anything about that. And again, that's where I think that he gets a short-term bump, but long-term, it's a political, it's political suicide, because how does an issue like that appeal to young people? How does it appeal to swing voters? How is it going to, get some of the voters who have been drifting away, from the suburbs? And again, it's sort of the shallowness and the glibness and the shamelessness of this guy. I mean, when you step back, some of the things he said about, Ukraine, he's referring to President Zelensky as the Pope. I mean, with these juvenile jibes, and I'm glad they pushed back on him. But it is, I suppose it's just a measure of what's happened now to the Republican Party, not breaking news, that a demagogic clown like that would be center stage.
Somebody asked, one of my followers asked, why don't moderators force candidates to answer the question? As somebody who's been in that position, it is very difficult. On the other hand, if Ron DeSantis had said, we're not in junior high, we're not going to raise our hands, yeah, I would have said, I'm sorry, Governor, you're actually not providing the structure of this debate. And if we ask a question like that, you need to answer it accordingly. Because I felt like he diminished them so quickly. And I felt that was really unfair.
Well,
but I would have said something, but it's really hard to know kind of how much you challenge somebody like that if you're going to come across as a total jerk and disrespectful. On the other hand, I thought that was really obnoxious of him.
Well, but he's been doing that. I mean, he's used to that. But down in Florida, that was his brand, right? Is to insult and attack any media person that asks him a tough question. Now, again, short term that worked in his favor. Long term, he's a guy that looks like he's not ready for prime time because he's gotten used to not answering questions. So that was just one of the examples of Ron DeSantis dodging the question, not wanting to answer the question. And I think that ultimately made him look weak rather than strong. It's one of the reasons why I don't think that he had the breakthrough night. And by the way, I actually had written my newsletter yesterday suggesting various, let's have, raise your hands to get a yes or no answer. And they did some of that. I know that that's kind of a, true false type cheap thing, but it is clarifying. And I think the most clarifying moment of the entire night was when they asked them to raise your hand if you would support Donald Trump, even if he was a convicted felon. And that was really revealing because 6 of the 8 candidates raised the hand. This is the party of law and order saying they would support Donald Trump back in the White House, even if he was a convicted felon. But it was also revealing because, again,
they were kind of like
Ron DeSantis, right? Exactly. You're doing the Ron DeSantis there. Ron DeSantis actually looks around and goes, what's everybody else saying? And then he raises his hand. I mean, even the body language was pathetic. And then,
well, why would Nikki Haley do that, for example, if she's separating herself from Trump, if she's saying, I mean, I know that everyone is hedging their bets, but on the other hand, like, grow a pair. I guess the only people who didn't raise their hands were Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson, right?
Okay, we've been doing this for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Like, it feels like 5 minutes ago, this would have been a really easy question. That of course, you are not going to support a candidate for city council, mayor, right, county board, senator, president of the United States, who was a convicted felon, who had been charged, tried, and found guilty by a jury of their peers. It feels like, and this is what makes this whole situation so surreal that we're having this conversation today. Because, again, this was a norm that wasn't even questioned. Sure, if you are convicted of a felony, you're not going to be in high public office. And a political party, one of the major political parties, would not support you if you were convicted of a crime. Now, you can, challenge the crime or say it's, unfair or anything, but that wasn't the question. The question was, what if he is convicted? So it was an extraordinary moment. And that's where you really saw that Donald Trump wasn't there on the stage. He was the orange elephant, not in the room. but his complete dominance over the party was apparent there, because every hand that went up basically said, yeah, I'm really still, despite everything, I'm still afraid of him. Even
And
Mike Pence and Nikki Haley.
did you watch his interview with Tucker Carlson?
I watched some of it. I mean, I'm not a complete masochist. And, and, and it is as bizarre as you would expect. And I don't know what your reaction was. You know, I continue to be really struck by the degree to which he wants to retcon January 6th, that he is so invested now in taking this violent insurrection that cost 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lives. People were killed that day, and he makes it the most beautiful day ever. It was patriots. He's made it clear that he will raise funds for the rioters, that he will sing songs with the rioters, that he will pardon them, that he is trying to do this revisionist history where his attempted coup, his attempt to overturn the election, was a good, noble, and patriotic thing. And he keeps doubling down on that. And
Do you see any of his support, Charlie, eroding at all, or has it stayed steady? And one of my followers wanted to know how accurate the polls are. As we know, they haven't been so reliable in recent years. Can we trust them? And do you see any kind of softening of his support?
okay, well, I'm going to give a yes and no answer. If you look at that hardcore MAGA base, that's not going to change. They're going to rally around him. They will ride until they die with him. Right? There's no erosion. But that's a minority of a minority. And so I think that the question to keep an eye on is what happens going forward after a year and a half of the testimony, the trials, the perp walks, all of this. What happens to the swing voters, the exhausted Republicans? And it's hard to imagine, even with everything that's happened, that does not hurt him. I can't see how the criminal charges convinces a single voter that he lost in 2020 coming back to him. So then the question is, will there be, Republicans who will go, okay, I'm still a Republican, but I cannot vote for this guy. I can't do it. So I do think that there are indications that there's erosion. As for the trustworthiness of the polls, if anything, I think they tend to undercount his support, because I do think that there are people who might not want to tell a pollster that they are in favor of somebody like Donald Trump, which is why his votes always seem to be a little bit higher than the polls indicate that they will be.
We got a lot of comments in the question section, Charlie, about Vivek Ramaswamy and how scary he was, and how sort of a younger version of Trump, and how if he gets elected or if he's the candidate, game over. And someone asked if he might be auditioning to be Trump's vice president. Does this guy have a future? He was loved by the audience, obviously, as you just said. He was throwing out red meat to the MAGA crowd. But, what do you think of him? And a lot of people are quite concerned about his ascent.
Well, I think they ought to be, because, he is talented. He is entertaining. He was the most vivid personality on that stage, which makes him more dangerous because of his demagoguery. I don't think he's going to be vice president. I don't think that Donald Trump would pick somebody that young and that perhaps unpredictable as vice president. Keep in mind that, at some point we got to really have a more in-depth discussion of who Donald Trump is going to pick for that. He's not going to pick anyone who's a threat to him. That's the one position he can't fire, as he found out. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was in the cabinet of a second Trump term. But also, I just think that the caution that I think he's one of those flames that's going to burn very, very hot and very bright, and then will burn out, because he's about to get a lot more scrutiny. And I'm not sure how he's going to do with that, because he's got a lot of baggage, and he says a lot of things that are contradictory. And I think the scrutiny is going to be tough. Just in the last week, and it didn't come up last night, he's raising questions about whether 9/11 was an inside job. He's been flirting with conspiracy theorists. I don't think that he's been fully vetted. And it's one thing for the mainstream media to vet him, but I think, fellow Republicans are going to go, okay, who is this guy? I mean, you could see on the stage that the one thing that united everybody on that stage was they all hated Vivek. They all because they all think the guy's a complete phony and a complete fake, which he is, and that he's dangerous, which he is. So we'll see how he's going to rise, but I don't know that he's got staying power.
I guess the question is, that sounds like other people who have done well in politics. So, right?
Well, once Donald Trump gets elected president of the United States, all bets are off, right? I mean, the glass is broken. But remember, Donald Trump had been around for 20 or 30 years. He was much better known. Vivek basically just parachuted out of pretty much nowhere. So I mean, we'll see this. I mean, I just remember. I mean, you've covered this for a long time. There were moments in Republican primaries where, hey, Michelle Bachmann is the hot new thing.
Yeah.
Remember when Harvey Kane was the hot new
right.
thing? Or there was a time when Newt Gingrich was surging in the polls and won South Carolina after a debate when he was asked about his open marriage, and yet none of those guys ended up going anywhere after that. So we'll see.
Let's move on, Charlie, and just sort of close things out by talking about tonight. Someone asked in the question section, and I think on social, why are they allowing Donald Trump to dictate that he is going to do this in prime time? And what can we expect to see when he gets to the Fulton County Courthouse, Charlie?
Well, the circus that he wants. I mean, he's chosen to do this, and I guess this would be, that is actually a good question. He has the right to choose the time, when he surrenders. I'm not sure that most of us have the right to choose when we get arrested, right?
Right.
But I don't know. I wanted to get your take on all of this because, I think there's almost a default setting that, okay, there must be some reptilian genius behind Donald Trump wanting to do this in prime time. I don't know. Does this really help him to do this in prime time, to be, arrested, fingerprinted, perp walked, the mugshot? That the mugshot is going to be on the front page of every newspaper in America tomorrow. And so Donald Trump thinks no publicity is bad publicity.
Yes, I think you're right.
I'm wondering about that.
I think that he has, as you said, he's fully embraced this counter narrative, and I think he's just full throttle, full stop, going to take this opportunity and play the victim.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to twist it. It was interesting, and I was kind of mad at my colleagues in network news when he left Walter Reed. He was in Walter Reed when he got COVID, right?
Right.
And they covered the helicopter going to the White House, which he scheduled to start at 6:30 when the evening newscast started it, and they followed the helicopter, and then he is such a showman, and he wants to make a production out of everything that happens to him because he is a malignant narcissist. And so I think this is part of the pathology of someone who wants all eyes on him no matter what. Now this, the COVID situation was when he triumphantly, if a little exhaustedly, walked up those steps, kind of breathing and showing that he was, this powerful guy. But he had orchestrated the whole thing. And so I think this is very much in line with his MO.
Well, it is, absolutely. And by the way, speaking of the way the media covers this, the slow moving Bronco coverage of the last perp walk was like, okay, have you learned nothing? Do we have to have the empty podium? Do we have to have he's getting out of the plane? Well, look, here's his car. It's going this way. I guess my question is, and you're exactly right, he's a malignant narcissist, but is the malignant narcissism a good strategy? Okay, so he's going to get a lot of attention, but is this really a good strategy? And I think that there's almost a little bit of PTSD in the pundit class where they keep thinking, he sort of understands how to do this and everything he does kind of works. And because we've all underestimated him time and again. But this strikes me as more malignant narcissism than, real man of political genius,
Yeah.
political decision. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. Apparently, there's going to be big crowds there tonight.
I think one final question that we get again and again is people just can't believe someone can face 91 charges, is embroiled in four different, court cases, criminal and civil, right? I guess court cases, federal and state, and still run for president of the United States. And I don't think it's ever been adequately explained. People have been asking about the 14th Amendment and why can't they remove him? And it just seems like a real flaw in the system, doesn't it, Charlie?
Yeah. Well, yes, and people can't understand how this is happening. This is cling to this. This is not normal. We've never seen anything remotely like this, so we don't know what's going to happen. And the founding fathers, who were not naive, still never envisioned this. They never imagined that someone like Donald Trump would get power and continue to try to seize power. So the fact is, he could be a convicted felon, he could be jailed, and he could still be elected and serve as president of the United States. I don't think that's what James Madison or Alexander Hamilton had in mind, but it is possible, which is why I think there's so much interest in this question of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which disqualifies anyone who engaged in insurrection. I understand the argument. I have read the law review article. I'm skeptical about whether or not that's practical, because as you point out, there's really not a mechanism. There was a mechanism. It was impeachment. And if Mitch McConnell would have pulled the trigger, we wouldn't be going through this right now. If 10 Republicans had voted to remove him, this wouldn't be happening. But I cannot really imagine any scenario in which a majority of this Supreme Court just says Donald Trump is disqualified. We're not going to let him run. We're not going to let him serve. So I think there's a little bit of wish casting going on there. But I certainly understand why people are going, how can this possibly happen? Because, we have been doing this now, for 7 or 8 years with Donald Trump? And we've been asking that question time and time again. And it doesn't get any easier to ask that, how this could happen and why tens of millions of Americans, including the political leaders, including the candidates you saw on the stage last night, why they would go along with it. This is a deep breath moment, and just a reminder to your listeners, you are not the crazy ones. You have been taking the crazy.
Well, why have all the Republicans like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell? Why haven't the whole lot of them said this is not right? It's because they don't want to lose power, and they need his base. They can't afford to lose his base. That's why they're walking that really weird, tightrope between criticizing him and yet supporting him. And I don't know. I interviewed Karl Rove in Aspen, and I said to him, we haven't seen a lot of profiles in Couric. And he said, well, I understand these people want to stay in office, but at what price? At some point, at what price? But,
Yeah, that's in 2016.
I don't know. Charlie, before we go, you kind of sound like you think Trump is going to win from some of your comments or some of the way that you've answered some of my previous questions. I have 2 closing questions. Do you think it is going to be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, barring something happening? And right now, who do you think has a better chance of winning?
I do think it's going to be Donald Trump versus Joe Biden again. The reality is this is a closely divided nation. Donald Trump could win in 2024. I don't think that he will. I do, I don't believe that they have repealed all of the laws of political gravity. I do think that there's going to be an exhaustion factor, but I don't think people should be in denial about this. I don't think they should be naive about this. I don't think they should just assume. I think one of the things going on, among Republicans, you've asked, why didn't they take a stand? There's a lot of magical thinking. The Mitch McConnells of the world, who understand exactly who Donald Trump is and what he represents, unlike Lindsey Graham, who's totally sold his soul. And I think the magical thinking is, something, unicorn, somebody else will take him out. They've been hoping that it would be the indictments, or they're hoping it's going to be a Big Mac. They just hope that somebody else is going to handle it. And I think there's an element of that on the part of the Democrats as well. They just simply assume, well, there's just no way that people are going to support this guy with all of this. But when you're going into an election season with an 81-year-old incumbent, the margin for bad, unexpected things happening is very, very, very thin. And that's frankly what makes me nervous. This is not a matter.
I also think one thing Democrats must be concerned about is the enthusiasm gap.
Yes.
We hear about that all the time, but Trump voters are deeply passionate. And while I think President Biden has a lot of very loyal support, it's not that rabid ride or die support that for whatever reason Donald Trump seems to engender in his base.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. But from the point of view of the Democrats, the one thing they need to close the enthusiasm gap is Donald Trump on the ballot. Donald Trump on the ballot, the prospect of another Trump presidency is, I think, going to be enough to motivate Democratic voters here in Wisconsin. The big question is, will Democrats turn out? If Donald Trump is on the ballot, absolutely, they will turn out. But nobody should be cocky about it. Nobody should take it for granted.
Hey, sorry, I know I left talking to you, Charlie. One more question. How did they get that audience at the debate in Milwaukee? Because they were, like the CNN Trump town hall that was such a disaster. These people seemed, maybe it's because there aren't that many moderate Republicans anymore, but it seems so heavily weighted in Donald Trump and Ramaswamy by extension in their favor.
Boy, this hits very close to home, obviously, because you remember back in 2016, Wisconsin Republicans were very anti-Trump. He lost here badly. So this transformation of the Republican Party, the Republican activists in southeastern Wisconsin have been radicalized, have been Trumpified. And I think that you saw that there. I've talked to elected officials Republican elected officials who say, we just can't understand what's happened to the people. We've known them for 20 years and they'll come up with some bizarre conspiracy theory, or they're upset about something, and they'll ask them, where did you hear that from? And they'll say, well, risingeaglepatriot.com YouTube channel. And so, this transformation has taken place over the last 5 years, and I think you saw an indication of that. But also, there were people who did cheer Mike Pence, who did cheer Nikki Haley. So I think you did get a division. There are indications. Sometimes the loudest voices aren't necessarily the most numerous voices.
Yes, no, I think you're right about that. It was really hard to ascertain, though, kind of the makeup of the crowd. I was really paying attention to how they would react to certain things, and you're totally right. But it just did seem to be the loudest voices were the MAGA voices.
Right. Which is the case in American, politics all across the country. Wisconsin is, I used to think Wisconsin was distinctive, but now, it would be the same story, I think, in South Carolina or in Indiana or Michigan or Arizona or Georgia.
Well, Charlie, thanks again. We'll be watching tonight to see this unprecedented. Someone said unprecedented has been used so much it's lost all its power. But we'll see what happens in Georgia tonight and in the weeks and months to come. Always a pleasure talking to you, Charlie. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you so much.
And thanks everyone for watching. Bye.